Be in the know with unlimited access to IBJ and Inside Indiana Business. Our in-depth coverage of all things business means you'll always be completely in the know. Subscribe for just $1 a week. Get started now at ibj.com/trial offer.
Hey, it's Pete the Planner. This is a very special episode of the podcast. I sat down with my friend. Okay, I was standing. I have a standing desk, so I can't actually sit down with anyone. I was talking to Mason King, the host of the IBJ podcast. Yeah, I'm on there every once in a while. And we were talking about Iran, the war in Iran. We were talking about oil. We're talking about the economy. And I liked our discussion so much, I wanted to share with you. So what you're about to listen to is from the IBJ podcast. I highly recommend you subscribe to that thing. It's good. Mason's fun. He and I have talked to each other a million times. So enjoy the conversation. And here you go.
This is the IBJ podcast for the week of April the 6th, 2026, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. The U.S. economy has been sending troubling signals for months now in the form of high energy prices, rising inflation, modest hiring, and slowing growth of gross domestic product. The United States began attacks in Iran in late February. Stalled tanker traffic at the Strait of Hormuz has disrupted the global oil market, and stock investors have yo-yoed along with mixed signals from Washington, D.C. about America's goals for the war. IBJ personal finance columnist Pete the Planner sees signs that point toward recession in the U.S., as well as a humanitarian crisis in Asia. In this week's podcast, Pete parses a passel of new challenges and layers on the potential impact of tariff refunds and rising mortgage rates. He also is concerned about the Trump administration's apparent attempts at influencing investor sentiment with statements about America's intentions in Iran. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Peter Dunn, a.k.a. Pete the Planner. Thanks for making time to catch up today.
Oh, I kind of knew with the headlines this week that a conversation with you was nigh.
Oh, we have a lot to talk about.
I feel like it too.
Let me go back a couple of weeks though. You wrote in your IBJ column last month, but really that was like 2 weeks ago,
sure,
that you think that we're headed into a recession, which we generally see as a downturn in economic activity. We do know that in the fourth quarter, the growth of U.S. gross domestic product was less than 1%. But what gives you the sense that we could be headed into negative GDP?
I would start with oil prices. I mean, there's a lot of different ingredients that make a recession, and oil prices being elevated and then manipulated down every 48 hours and then rising back to what the market actually holds is not a good sign. Can I back way up and give like a huge disclaimer for today's episode? I didn't even clear this with you, but I'd like to do it if you trust me.
Oh, how would that be different from any other episode?
That's fair. Today I'm going to give, this is all opinion. Now I have some expertise. I'm well read. I'm giving opinion. I listen to a lot of different media right now, and I don't like when I'm made to feel like I'm being influenced. Like I'm not trying to make the case so people believe what I believe. And I just want to say that because I'm just going to share what I think, if nothing else for people to say, oh, I disagree with that, and then have their own opinion. Like, I don't like the idea that I'm trying to influence people with what I think is going on, especially on a topic as sensitive as this. Is that fair game?
Yeah, but you're not making this up. You do believe the things that you say.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going like there was no moon landing. We're not doing that today, right? But I've got a lot of thoughts on this, and I talked about oil prices, and I talked about that. I believe that the president of the United States is openly manipulating both the equity markets and the energy markets, and I think what scares me as much as anything, because we are a global economy now, is the famine coming to Southeast Asia because of the food crisis that is impending due to shipping issues in the Strait of Hormuz. So I think like we're here to talk about the U.S. economy, but it's hard to talk about the U.S. economy in a impending recession without talking about the global reasons why. And I think the humanitarian crisis that is on our doorstep is not worth ignoring.
Can you go into a little more detail of that? I am so focused on the Final Four right now because I'm like literally working on top of it. And I'm really concerned about the U.S. economy. I don't know what's going on in Southeast Asia.
Okay. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. It's since COVID, Mason, there's every 6 months, there's a new term, there's a new concept that no one had ever heard of really before, the average person, and then everyone's an expert on it now. So Strait of Hormuz is one, right? The petrodollar, which we'll talk a little bit about today, the concept of petrodollar. And I just think it's funny, right? At one point, we're all constitutional law experts or immunology experts. And now I talk about the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis. Anyway. So as many people have heard, not only is energy bottlenecked in the Strait of Hormuz, and we can't ship, 20 to 30% of the world's oil supply, energy supply, to the countries primarily in Asia.
Yeah, that's about 20%, I believe.
Yeah, 20%. But the other issue is the fertilizer issue, and a vast amount of fertilizer comes from that same region is also bottlenecked. So that is to say, the fertilizer used to grow crops around the world is not available. So not only do you see in places that have food insecurity, trouble having food for those folks, but then you see the energy costs in those areas, which when energy costs go up, the cost of everything goes up. Then you see that strain on people's budget. So if food, because of supply and demand in those regions, is more expensive because there's less supply, right? High school economics. And now you have less money to spend on those things anyway because energy is so expensive. It creates this pretty nasty situation for countries that do not have as much food stability as maybe the United States. And so while we are talking about the recession and why I think there's going to be a recession, I think as much as it is about oil prices, it's about a global recession that's going to take hold that's eventually going to poison the United States. So dark stuff, but that's where I think we are.
Okay. Domestically, is it fair to say that businesses are more cautious than they were a year ago?
Yeah. So we're having this conversation on April 2nd. As a former radio person, it's always good to ruin the evergreen nature of audio. But Mason, I don't know if you remember, this is the first anniversary of one of the greatest days in American history.
Liberation Day.
Liberation Day.
Yes.
Happy Liberation Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Strangely, I don't feel much more liberated, but that's okay.
So, back to Liberation Day. I think businesses freaked out more during Liberation Day and the 60 days following than they're going to freak out in this period. I don't think massive business decisions are being driven by the energy crisis right now. I think those concerns have shifted more to sort of AI and the role of AI. I think, I don't think businesses are, other than the airlines, are really freaking out right now as much as we did last year on Liberation Day.
Right. At this point in the discussion, I want to inject the clinical definition of a recession. It's 2 consecutive quarters of shrinkage. I guess that's a medical term. Shrinkage in gross domestic product. So a lot of the time, especially in that first quarter, we don't even know that we're in a recession because we haven't seen the GDP numbers yet. So especially in that first quarter, a lot of folks just experience it as a set of feelings, or maybe as observations. Like, for example, if you've been laid off, or you're in a business and you see sales slowing down. And we know that hiring in the United States slowed in February to its lowest point since the beginning of the recession, since the beginning of the pandemic. Your thoughts?
I think we were probably not contracting in Q1 in totality, right? Like once it's calculated, it'd be really close. If we went month by month, March would absolutely be recessionary territory, in my opinion. And I think second quarter will. So you're going to have 4 months of contraction, and then it just sort of depends what happens in Q3. But if you want to go in the spirit of there's a contraction of economic activity spanning 2 different quarters, then I think we're there. And as I wrote in my column, I think one of the most concerning parts about this is the Federal Reserve was enacted to put the brakes on the economy when necessary with various tools, interest rates being one of them, right? When inflation eases and you're in a good spot, you can lower interest rate. If inflation is rising, then you either hold or increase interest rates to encourage or discourage particular behaviors. I think the hardest part about what we're about to go through is that if the Fed weren't as popular as it is these days in geopolitics, the Fed would actually be looking at cutting rates as opposed to being forced, those are air quotes for those just listening with their ears, forced to consider lowering rates again. So that actually, I don't want to say, oh, I'm scared. I'm not scared. What concerns me is the fact that we are probably closer to a conversation around cutting rates. We should be, at least, and we're actually still talking about, we should be increasing rates, not talking about cutting rates.
Right, yeah. You made an analogy in your column. You compared raising interest rates to pumping the brakes on an economy that's headed downhill.
Mm-hmm.
So in this situation, perhaps with a pending downturn, higher interest rates are our friend.
That's interesting. I would make it akin to, you're making your kids eat vegetables and they're like, this is terrible. What are you doing to me? And you're like, no, this is your friend. They're like, oh, it's not my friend. Which is why my mother-in-law makes like a chocolate zucchini cake. She's sneaking into zucchini. I find it disingenuous. I've never said that to her. She doesn't listen to your show though, so don't worry. But same thing, right? It's like it serves us in the end. But there's pain. I've said this on the show before, and it is always received by anyone who hears it with a guffaw, a negative guffaw. A recession is the solution to a problem. It is not the problem, right? A recession is that this entity, which is the economy, is correcting itself. It's self-healing, and a recession is the way it does that. It contracts and it shrinks so it can get stronger again. Mm-hmm. The fact that it gets smaller is a problem, but it is not the problem. And maybe I'm splitting words, but that's the way I've always viewed it.
It's in recovery mode.
Yeah.
Right? As I learned during the Olympics and the many advertisements that you would see during the Olympics, getting a good night's sleep is essential to recovery.
What time of day were you watching this? Like 2 a.m?
It was streaming. I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
I basically set up my bedroom in the basement with the TV.
Wow. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. It goes a little deeper. Like there's a lot of sort of dark content out there right now around what this means long term. I'm not there yet, but I think we should talk about it. But I'm personally not all the way there yet, and it revolves around petrodollars. Have you become a petrodollar expert in the last 30 days?
I have not. No, I a couple of years ago sold my holdings in Exxon, and so I have been blissfully unaware of how that might affect me.
All right. So here is my understanding, and the thing is about your listenership is every single person that listens to the show is smarter than me, so they can feel free to correct me. But this is my understanding. So the concept of a petrodollar is that when people buy oil from the Middle East, the currency used to make the purchases across the board is the US dollar. That's just the way it is, right? People are not buying in other currencies. They're buying in the US dollar, which means the Gulf countries then have US dollars, which is why they use those US dollars to buy our debt. They use those US dollars to make investments in domestic things, whether it be soccer clubs or airlines or whatever else, because they're holding the US dollar. So it's this symbiotic relationship between our dollar holds value because it's this currency that everyone uses, and then the Gulf countries pumping those dollars back into our US economy. Here's the issue. If the dynamics of that region start to fall apart, where if the US pulls out, they say, okay, we won, whatever that means, we won and we're out. Now the Strait of Hormuz, which we're all experts on, is your problem to deal with now, which is what's sort of being talked about. Go get your own oil is what we're hearing. Then the dynamics of what we're dealing with the petrodollar completely changes, because at some point in time, those Gulf nations may say, all right, well, you don't have to use US dollars to buy our oil. And then then they're not pumping those US dollars back into our economy, right? And so this is a long-term threat that you hear some economists talking about, is the fall of the petrodollar. I mean, Mason, you and I are about the same age. We say this every episode. I never remember the Middle East the way I now think about Dubai. When I was growing up, I never thought about the opulence of the Middle East. I always just, I don't know, maybe I was dumb. Maybe I'm dumb now. I don't know. But there's an opulence to the Middle East of what all of the oil money is able to do, all these investment funds. Well, if people aren't going to the Middle East because they don't feel safe, because drones are flying all over the place, and you know, you get into concepts like desalination plants being bombed, and then you can't even go. It starts to make a case of that the unraveling of the petrodollar is the biggest risk here, other than the humanitarian crisis. Needless to say, I spend too much time consuming this content.
Well, I appreciate the explanation.
Does it make sense, or are you stuck on anything?
No, I got it.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to the Fed. The next meeting is April 28th and 29th. I assume the hostilities in Iran have changed the complexity of the rate decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last time they voted, one person voted for a rate cut. This was last month. No, they're not cutting rates at the end of this month. It's impossible. I bet you see 2 or 3 votes for a rate increase. I think one of the wildest things I've seen in the last week and a half or so is that mortgage rates spiked when all of this was going on, right? And to me, that is to say, lenders are looking at this and going, well, this isn't good, because we don't believe the economy is going to grow and people's incomes are going to go up, and that they're going to be able to afford to make these house payments. If you think about this for a second, if mortgage rates spike, one way to interpret that is that there's more risk for the lender. The lender is saying, in order for us to make these loans, we're going to need to make a little bit more on it, because they're a little riskier than we want to deal with. And that risk, in my opinion, is because of the uncertainty around the economy itself.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up a little bit later, but we can talk about it now, because this was one of the stories that you predicted would be a big one in 2026. You were concerned that interest rates for home buyers wouldn't come down fast enough to help buyers whose wages aren't increasing as quickly as home prices are. But yeah, as you mentioned, rates have been coming down slowly but steadily since the beginning of 2025. But since late February, when the bombing started, the average rate for the 30-year mortgage has risen from 5.98% to 6.38%, so 0.4. That seems like super unfortunate timing as we head into the spring buying season.
Couple things there. First of all, the phrase "when the bombing started" is such a awful phrase. I mean, you know what? That's not on you, but I'm saying, like, just hearing that, like, when the bombing started, that's terrible. Anyway, not criticism of King Mason. let's talk about home buying in the spring. So I got this one neighbor that always mulches before everybody else. You know what I mean? Like their stuff looks good. A good 37, 38 days before everybody else. But to me, every time I see it, because I've lived there forever, I'm like, well, it's about to be home buying season, right? Like everyone's getting their stuff together, curb appeal. And this is the time when young couples or old couples or singles or whatever, they go and they say, okay, I want a new start, a fresh start. Let's go look at a new place, new construction, could do this. What terrible timing for a spike in interest rates. What a terrible timing for Oracle to announce that they're laying off 30,000 people. What terrible timing that, we look at the gas pump and think about, oh, well, we could buy this house, but it's 30 miles further from work than I thought it'd be. But, oh, wow, that's another $120 a week in fuel costs. Like, it's just really bad timing for the home market. One of my favorite things to read in the IBJ on a regular basis is the local home builders sentiment of like new starts and all of that.
I write that. So that's one of the things that I write.
Do you write that?
Yeah, some of it, yeah.
Yeah, I just like when I see it, I'm like, I click it, I read it, because to me, that is a very localized way to understand where we're heading. You know, it's a consumer confidence indicator to me.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Spring is coming, and that means it's time to bring your backyard back to life. At Indie Grills, we design and build custom outdoor living spaces that turn your patio into the best room of the house. From stamped concrete patios to cozy outdoor fireplaces to fully custom outdoor kitchens built for grilling, gathering, and entertaining, we do it all. We handle everything from design to build, and we're known for doing it one way. Built fast, built right, on time, and on budget. So before summer fills up, start now. Visit indiegrills.com and schedule your outdoor living consultation today. Indie Grills. This is where spring begins.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ podcast in my conversation with Pete the Planner about challenging currents in an economy tilting toward recession. Since we were talking about gas prices, let me jump into pocketbook issues real quick. Broad question. How do we safeguard our finances during a suspected recession?
Our bodies are kind of meant to do it, not to turn into quackery here, but fight or flight. And so what ends up happening to people's financial brain is that when times get tough, they stop spending money as much. Like some people stress spend, like I'm one of them, by the way. But they also, once they get past that initial stress spend, they're like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't order DoorDash because it's imprudent and there's now a fuel surcharge, right? I'm not saying there is a fuel surcharge, but I'm guessing there's a fuel surcharge. And so that's one element of it, right? Of that a person stops spending so much money. Then the other thing you get are these anecdotal stories of, well, my neighbor lost their job and I better tighten it up a little bit. So I think most people, when a recession starts to happen, if you're upper middle and below, prudence presides, like it's there and it is helpful. I do think there are people, I guess we call upper class, whatever that is, there are people who can ignore it. Right. There certainly are. And what's interesting about 2026 is you get to publicly see people ignore it. You get to drive by these restaurants that have incredibly high prices and they're full. You get to see Instagram where people are buying brand new things. And so it is really strange compared to the recessions of our high school years, because you never knew that people were ignoring recession. So I think there's some cultural pull and distraction there.
Okay. Emergency funds. We want to maintain an emergency fund. here's a question that I found myself up against. If I find myself in the situation where I need to spend some money for a necessary expense, let's say a new roof, even though I already got a new roof, is it better for me to take it from my emergency fund than try to sell investments at a low point?
I feel like the Indiana State Securities Commissioner is listening to this episode, because if I were to give you this advice, this is securities advice. And I am not a licensed registered representative in the state of Indiana. So nice entrapment, Mason. I thought we were friends. You're trying to set me up for some sort of Class C felony, but I'll answer the question. So the market, S&P 500 is down, I think, let's see, 5%-ish year to date.
Yeah,
which is a little bit wild. It is wildly swinging over the last few days. If you want to view that as the market is down, if you want to say, oh, the market is down, we're not in correction territory, but let's say we're close. Selling low ain't it, Queen? Like we don't want to do that, you know? So that element alone has us going, probably wouldn't do that. Emergency fund. If you feel like your employment's solid, that's probably a better choice, because then you look at what it is to have consumer debt, and interest rates are still pretty high on consumer debt. So of those three choices, cash, credit, or sell your investments, generally speaking, if you've got an emergency fund and you feel good about your employment, I would go emergency fund.
Okay. Thank you for your candor. I will not report you. That doesn't help me at all.
Do you think the Indiana Securities Commissioner listens to this show?
I would be amazed.
Let's see who it is. I used to know, but for good reasons.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry.
All right. So yeah, you brought up the stock market. That's where we were headed anyway. So yeah, investors in the stock market have had a tough first quarter in 2026. So as of yesterday, S&P was down 3.5% for the year to date. And that included the big rally earlier this week. A rally earlier this week. First, I want to ask, is a weak stock market a sign of recession? Are they necessarily linked?
Not necessarily. Yeah, there's enough of a gap there. Let me see if I can find this message. I think I sent this on Monday morning to my co-hosts of my podcast, the Pete the Planner podcast on the IBJ Media Network. I sent this to my team earlier this week. I sent something to the effect of, did the oil markets and the stock market just disconnect from each other? Because what happened is the oil market was spiking, but so was the stock market. And it's usually the other way. If oil market spikes, the stock market falls, right? And so earlier this week, it was the oil was still flying up, and then the stock market took off. And I was like, are they disconnected now? I think we actually talked about this maybe on the last episode. Is the economy disconnected from the equities market? I think we're at this weird inflection point where you could ask the question, will the stock market ever really go down? Not investment advice. In the face of the hardest economic times. And I think it's getting harder to see a case in which the market gets hammered. Not investment advice.
So I've got questions. This goes back to something you said earlier about how statements from President Trump about America's objectives in the Iran conflict have affected the stock market. It seems like the market does not like hawkish, aggressive statements about our intentions in Iran. And this most recent bounce, just earlier this week, came as Trump indicated the war might be over within 2 or 3 weeks and that the U.S. wouldn't get involved in trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And then just last night, Trump went on national TV for a 20-minute address about Iran and then turned hawkish again, said the U.S. would hit Iran hard over the next couple of weeks and then, quote, send them back to the Stone Age, end quote. Also didn't provide a firm timeline for the end of the war. And this morning, S&P futures were down 1.5%. Now, the tone of his comments changes so often. I sometimes wonder if it isn't a form of market manipulation, but it sounds like you think that it is.
That is my opinion.
Yes.
That is my opinion. I think on Monday morning before the markets opened, I think that's the timing. Could have been Tuesday. You saw very distinct commentary that was meant to quell fear, and you saw the market spike. And I also want to say, because I think this is important, I'm not saying that the market is being manipulated for financial gain by President Trump. I'm not making that insinuation at all. I think the pressure is off of him when the market is doing well. And so if you're feeling a lot of pressure, you want the market to do well. The bomb them into the Stone Ages line last night. And I was listening to that, and I immediately went to the markets around the world, kind of went and said, like, what is going on? And you could see an instant reaction, right? Like it is, if this excursion drags on, his words, not mine. If it drags on for weeks into months more, the whole petrodollar thing becomes realer and realer and realer, and you're virtually guaranteeing famine in Southeast Asia, and from my understanding.
So we have zero evidence that the president is trying to manipulate the markets for his own gain. Zero. But we do know.
Yeah.
But we do know that people who invest in the stock market are beginning to, find patterns in what happens to the stock market after he makes particular kinds of comments, and that's one of the new phrases that I'm surprised you didn't bring up. That's the taco trade. What is that?
Taco trade is a pop culture acronym for Trump always chickens out. And it's to suggest that he'll go right up to the line of threats and big statements. And then when the time comes, he'll back down from those threats. And one example of that, by the way, I'm conveying the concept here, right? Yeah. I'm not stacking hands on it. It's a sensitive topic, Mason. So like, I just like, again, I'm not here to influence. I'm here to inform. So, one example of that is when, I think it was last week, Iran had 5 days to agree to something.
I think it might have been even less. I mean, initially, it was less.
Yeah, you're right, dude. It's 48 or 72 hours to do something. Then it turned into 5 days. Then it turned into 10 days. And then I don't know, the math has escaped me, and I'm decent at the math. So so it is the idea that there's threats and then it backs down. And I think we saw that with tariffs. And I think you're seeing a similar pattern.
Yeah, the term taco, I think, was coined about a year ago during the Liberation Day, or the initial implementation and perhaps re-implementation of tariffs, and how they started to seesaw.
My show a couple of weeks ago, we did a thing on how high school economics has been replaced by personal finance. I don't know if you know this, in several states. Which is an interesting topic because, like, you would think I would want personal finance classes in high schools, and I do, but they've replaced high school econ. So now I don't have kids taking high school econ. In my dumb brain, I believe that the American public's understanding or lack thereof of economics is what gets us through this. If you understand economics, then you put pressure on the lawmakers and our government officials because it's the law of economics. If you don't, then you don't see how any of this stuff fits together, and you have no reason to look lower than superficial level.
Taco, good investment strategy?
No. Yeah. Now the securities commissioner is listening. Look, someone just tried to make an ETF out of it. I know that.
You're joking.
I don't know if you.
I did
No,
not
I'm
know that.
dead serious. That happened this week.
Wow.
I have no comment on that. Actually, I'll say this. I'm not doing it. I shouldn't influence you.
That's more of a day trading play anyway.
Totally, it is. And you know what grinds my gears? Since we're airing grievances now, I've seen it 2 or 3 times in the last month. How to trade the war. Like columns in like the Wall Street Journal of like how to shape your portfolio to take advantage of.
Oh God.
Bombing Iran. And maybe it's because I'm from Speedway, but I find that inherently gross. And I just want to go on the record to say, sure, call me whatever you want. But that feels gross.
Okay. I buy that.
That being said, I don't think it's gross if you traded on trying to take advantage of the tariffs. But it does when the bombs started falling. When that phrase is connected to this conversation, it feels a little gross to say, "Oh, how am I going to trade?"
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to check in for our last bit here on your predictions for 2026, which you made more than 3 months ago. Usually, we'd wait until the end of the year, but things.
How am I doing? Is it going well?
You're doing. I think you know how you're doing.
I know. I hate it. I hate it. I told you. I wish I was wrong.
Yeah. I have a sneaking suspicion that you are ready to address what you predicted would be the story of the year for 2026.
It's also important at this point to disclose that I have the world's worst memory.
Okay.
But I believe what I said was the refunding of tariffs.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I, as I predicted, the Supreme Court said that President Trump's tariffs were unlawful or unconstitutional. Again,
yeah, the reciprocal tariffs. Yeah,
reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah.
So the challenge with making that ruling is then theoretically the U.S. government would have to refund all of this taxation, and that's one of the reasons I thought they might not do it because of just that version of a quagmire. Yet here we are. They ruled them unconstitutional, and theoretically there's a plan being put in place or fully ignored to refund tariffs. And so
here's what I know real quick. Yeah. There's a Reuters report on this on Tuesday. So the U.S. Customs Agency says it is making progress on setting up a process for refunding $166 billion in tariff collections. These are the ones that were deemed illegal by the Supreme Court. But that a new system would take up to 45 days to review and process refund applications. They've started receiving applications.
Want another prediction?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what's going to happen in the midterms. Okay. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next presidential election. But what I do believe will happen is that this issue will be punted and punted and punted and punted, and whoever's the next president of the United States is going to fall directly in their lap. And arguably, if the other side wins, if the Democrats take office, it is going to drop into their lap, and it's going to become an albatross for that administration that's going to have to deal with, and they're going to they're going to somehow end up taking the blame for it. Now, if the GOP wins again, it's going to get punted and punted and punted and punted again. So does that negate my initial prediction that it's going to mess up our economy? I don't know, but I feel like with additional information, that's what's going to happen.
So you thought it was going to mess up the economy to bring all this tax money back to basically U.S.-based importers because they were the ones who paid the tax.
Yeah, actually, let me say that differently. I thought it would mess up. It would actually be good for those businesses, obviously, and they could make more investments and grow. I think it would be bad for the government finances is maybe the clarity I need to bring there. Like
Sure.
We're already $1 billion in debt. That would also not be helpful because I think we got into the T's with what they owe. I think they owe $1 trillion or something like that.
I have trouble differentiating between the deficit and the debt.
Did I say this on the show the last time I was here? If like I'm now at a point where I see something billion and it now means nothing to me anymore.
Absolutely nothing. I get that feeling all the time now.
I always have to root myself back in stadium costs, which is the dumbest thing in the world. But like that, our spy plane or something was destroyed last week. Yours and mine. We share ownership. But the U.S. won $700 billion, something like that. Right?
Yeah.
700 million? Billion?
Billion. It's billion.
I don't even know.
Right. Yeah.
Is it billion or million?
I think it's billion.
No, it can't be million. It has to be 700 million. See, but this is my point. Actually, my stupidity is making my point. That's how wild our government finances are, that you have to seriously question whether it's 700 million or 700 billion. It's 700 million.
I was looking at some story, and I don't think it was necessarily related to Indiana, but about some sports team that was building a new stadium for something like $160 million.
Man.
And I was like, wow, that's cheap. Let's get their guys. I was like,
let's get their guys. It is a little wacky.
Anything else you want to bring up before we put a lid on this one?
No, I'm trying not to like turn this into an after school special, or again, I'm not trying to garner influence, right? I'm just more of number one, I think there's a humanitarian crisis on the front porch coming here that impacts humans, but also impacts the global economy, which then impacts the domestic economy. Don't love that. And beyond that, I think the longer the war goes on, the more this petrodollar theory of oil not being purchased in dollars anymore, I think that starts to become a concern if we find ourselves alienated from the Gulf Coast countries. Right now, we are theoretically still protecting them, and they want us to sort of finish the job. But if we say we won and leave the Strait of Hormuz for them to deal with, then you could see that disconnection, which is kind of scary.
Oh, yikes. Okay. You know what? If we do an after-school special, I think I'm going to, just to see if this works, I'm going to see if we can get Christy McNichol to come on.
Of course. As long as we can like drink Yoo-hoo or Chocola or something that I would drink after school while I watch those trite programs.
My thanks again to Peter Dunn. A quick reminder, his column on personal finance appears regularly in the print edition of IBJ, and you can find several years' worth of his work at IBJ.com. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are several stories in this week's edition of IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, Phil Ray, the general manager of the towering JW Marriott, is going out with a bang as Indianapolis hosts its 9th Final Four. Heading into retirement, he holds court on how Indianapolis can remain a go-to location for major sporting events and conventions. Also in this week's issue, Daniel Bradley digs into the philosophy that has helped Carmel-based BSA Life Structures become a leader in development of healthcare facilities. And Susan Orr delves into a lawsuit involving allegations of financial mismanagement at addiction treatment centers. Now, again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. Now, it is quite a bit easier to access all the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to IBJ.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.
From broadcast to podcast, Inside Indiana Business with Gary Dick is now available anytime on YouTube or in your podcast feed. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcast or at ibjpodcast.com.
Do you want to know what really drives change in Indiana? You won't find it in sound bites, you'll find it in stories. Stories from CEOs, lawyers, coaches, entrepreneurs, and community advocates. That's the IBJ Media Podcast Network. Insightful, local, impactful. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcast.com.